All right, so we're diving into something kind of interesting today.
Yeah.
You've probably seen this post floating around online, you know the one, right?
Mhm.
A husband, he's really upset with his pregnant wife,
Yeah.
and she's taking food from his plate.
Yeah, I saw all the comments. People were so quick to jump to judgment, calling her greedy, entitled.
It's really easy to get caught up in that initial reaction, isn't it?
Totally.
And here's where I think it gets really fascinating. This whole thing, the seemingly like simple etiquette issue,
Right.
it actually opens up this much bigger conversation.
Exactly. It's about food insecurity.
And especially during pregnancy, right?
Absolutely. It's such a critical time.
You know, we often just brush it off as, oh, pregnancy hormones, she's eating for two.
Right. Exactly.
But we rarely stop to think, is there more to this?
Yeah, I think what's interesting here is how quickly we blame the woman. You know,
Yeah.
it's like this societal expectation that pregnant women are just constantly hungry. They'll eat anything.
And it's always chalked up to hormones, right?
Right, exactly. But we forget there's a whole other layer to this. We forget about food insecurity.
So you're saying it's not just about cravings, it's about access to food.
Exactly. It's about not having enough.
And the thing is, this isn't just some rare occurrence, right? We often think of food insecurity as something that happens elsewhere, not in our own backyards.
Right. And that's simply not true. It happens everywhere, even in developed countries like the U.S.
And that brings us to the real twist in this story, because it turns out this couple, they're only having one meal a day.
Wow.
Yeah, because they're struggling financially.
It completely changes the context, doesn't it?
Right, suddenly it's not just a husband annoyed with his wife's eating habits.
It's about a much bigger picture, a systemic issue even.
Exactly. It's about a couple facing real challenges.
Food insecurity, and not just during the pregnancy, but before, potentially after. It's a constant struggle.
So her eating off his plate, it's not just about bad manners or hormones, it's a deeper issue, right?
Absolutely. It's a sign of a much deeper struggle.
And then you layer on the whole pregnancy aspect of it.
Right, exactly.
This isn't just a woman who's a little hungry. This is a woman who's trying to grow a human being and struggling to even meet her own basic needs.
Yeah, and I think that's where it gets really concerning because we're talking about potential health risks here, both for the mother and the baby.
And it's not just hypothetical. Right.
No, not at all. I mean, one commenter shared their own experience saying, "My body is completely different. My bone and dental health are shit."
It's heartbreaking to read that.
It really is, and it highlights the very real consequences of this issue.
And another commenter said something like, babies will straight up strip mine your bones for calcium and then go back for more from your organs.
It's a scary thought, but it's the reality of what happens when you're not getting enough nutrients, especially during pregnancy.
So we're not just talking about, a couple having a tough time making ends meet. We're talking about long-term health consequences.
Absolutely. It's a domino effect. Malnutrition during pregnancy can lead to preterm labor, low birth weight, and even lifelong health issues for the child.
And that's just the physical side of things.
Exactly. We haven't even touched on the emotional and psychological toll this takes on individuals and relationships. The stress, the anxiety, the potential for conflict. It's a lot to handle.
Okay, so we've uncovered some really heavy stuff here, but I think it's important to acknowledge that, to let it sink in.
I agree.
But the good news is there's also hope. There's support out there for families struggling with food insecurity.
There is.
And that's what we're going to dive into next.
Great.
We're going to explore the resources, the solutions, and the ways people are coming together to make a difference.
Sounds good.
It's easy to get stuck in that really heavy place, thinking about all those challenges.
Yeah.
But there are also these glimmers of hope in the comment.
Oh, absolutely. Amidst all that judgment and frustration, there was this outpouring of support, people sharing resources, offering advice.
It's actually really heartwarming to see.
It really was. People genuinely wanted to help this couple.
So let's talk about those solutions. What were some of the things people suggested?
Food banks were a big one. WIC, SNAP, even just personal offers to connect with local resources.
Okay, so those are all great starting points, but for someone who's never had to access those resources, it can be hard to know where to begin, right?
Absolutely. It can feel really overwhelming.
So let's break it down a little. What exactly are food banks? How do they work?
Sure. So food banks are basically nonprofit organizations that distribute food to people in need, often through partnerships with local grocery stores, farms, things like that.
So they're like the bridge between surplus food and families who are struggling.
Exactly. They play a crucial role in addressing food insecurity at a very local level.
And then there's WIC. I know that stands for Women, Infants, and Children.
Right. It's a federally funded program specifically designed to support low-income pregnant women, breastfeeding women, postpartum women, as well as infants and children up to age 5.
So it's really targeted support for those crucial early years.
Exactly. They provide things like supplemental food, nutrition education, healthcare referrals.
And then SNAP, that's the one that used to be called food stamps, right?
You got it. It was renamed in 2008 to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program.
Catchier. I like it. So what does SNAP do?
Basically, it provides financial assistance to help low-income families buy food.
It's amazing to see how all these different resources kind of work together to create a safety net, you know?
Yeah, it's a multi-pronged approach.
But are these programs enough? I mean, we still hear about people falling through the cracks.
That's the big question, isn't it? I think access and awareness are big challenges. A lot of people who are eligible for these programs don't even know they exist.
Or they don't know how to access them, right?
Yeah, exactly. There can be a lot of bureaucratic hurdles, paperwork to fill out. It can be daunting.
And then there's the stigma, right?
Absolutely. The shame and embarrassment that can prevent people from asking for help, even when they desperately need it.
I read a comment from someone saying their sister, who was pregnant and struggling, needed help from a family member just to go to a food bank because her fiancé was too embarrassed to go himself.
It's heartbreaking, isn't it?
It really is. But amidst all that, there were also these stories of people who are fighting to change things, you know?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like one commenter who talked about their grandfather who had been part of the Black Panthers and fought for food justice, helping to establish programs like WIC.
Wow, that's powerful.
It really is. It reminds you that change is possible. And it often starts with those individual acts of courage.
And those programs, they're making a real difference. Even just reading through the comments, there were people sharing their own experiences with WIC, talking about how it helped them afford formula for their baby or get extra fruits and vegetables or even just stay in school while they were pregnant.
It's those stories that really bring it home, you know?
They do. They remind us that these programs aren't just abstract government initiatives. They're literally changing lives.
And that there's no shame in asking for help.
None whatsoever. These programs are there to support families to ensure that everyone has access to basic nutrition.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the challenges of food insecurity to the impact on pregnancy, the resources that are out there, even the inspiring stories of resilience.
It's been quite a journey.
But I think the biggest question now is, what can we do about it? How do we move beyond awareness and actually make a difference?
I'm glad you asked.
So where do we go from here? We've talked about the problem, the impact, the resources, but what can we actually do about food insecurity, you know, as individuals, as communities?
It's a big question, and I think a good starting point is understanding that food insecurity exists on a spectrum. You know, some families might experience occasional food shortages, while others are facing chronic hunger. And recognizing those nuances within our own communities is really the first step towards effective action.
So tailoring our response to the specific needs of our local area.
Exactly, because once we understand the challenges, we can start to identify the most impactful solutions.
Makes sense. So where do we begin?
Well, supporting local food banks is always a great place to start. These organizations are often on the front lines, providing that essential food assistance to families in need.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? What does that look like?
Donations are huge, obviously, whether it's non-perishable food items, financial contributions, even just volunteering your time.
Yeah, every little bit helps, right?
Absolutely, because a lot of these food banks are really struggling to keep up with the demand.
And what about those larger scale solutions, like those government programs we talked about, WIC and SNAP? Is there anything we can do on that front?
Definitely. I think advocating for policies that strengthen and expand those programs is crucial.
So how do we do that?
Contacting your elected officials is a big one. Making food security a priority in your conversations. Voting for candidates who champion those policies that address poverty and hunger, because those programs, they really are lifelines for so many families.
And yet they're often the first to face cuts when budgets get tight.
Exactly. So making our voices heard is more important than ever.
So it's about individual action, but also collective action, right?
Absolutely. And I think we should never underestimate the power of just, simple acts of kindness.
Like what?
Checking in on your neighbors, especially those who might be struggling. Offering a meal, running an errand, just lending an ear. Those small gestures can make a world of difference.
It's about fostering that sense of community.
Exactly, because addressing food insecurity isn't just about providing meals. It's about creating a society that values everyone's well-being, everyone's right to adequate nutrition.
That's a powerful message, and I think a great place to end our deep dive today. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought. What's one small step you can take this week to make a difference? Maybe it's donating to a food bank, volunteering your time. Maybe it's just starting a conversation about this issue with a friend. Whatever it is, remember that even small actions can have a ripple effect. And that's what it's all about, creating a world where everyone has enough to eat. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me.